Greetings and welcome to From the Basement. In this video we're going to start taking a look at the basics of GameMaker Studio. Now I get mine off of Steam because I have sort of an unusual situation that I hop between a lot of different computers, and Steam just makes it easier for me to manage my downloads. I don't get nattered on about having too many installs on my CD key and all that other jazz. So I generally find the Steam version to be the most efficient for me. Honestly, it doesn't matter whether you buy it from Steam or Yo-Yo Games website. One thing I do want to point out, because I think GameMaker sometimes unfairly has a reputation as being a toy, and I would like to point out that there's actually some really good games out there that have been made with GameMaker. As you can see here, Hotline Miami, Nidhogg, Risk of Rain, Gunpoint, which is an excellent puzzle stealth game, by the way, Super Crate Box. All of these things were done in GameMaker. So if you are willing to spend the time to learn this tool, there's some truly impressive 2D work that you can do with this game engine. Now, if you're starting up the Steam version, you'll initially come to this screen. If you are not on the Steam version, you won't see this one at first. Instead, you will see the default Open Project menu, like this. Now, what I'm going to do for this video is I'm going to do a quick run through on making an extremely simple game. Now, pretty much everything I'm going to do in this video, I'm going to come back to in a later video and go over in more depth. The purpose of this one is not necessarily to seek understanding for everything that we are doing, but rather just seeing what is the flow of steps necessary to create a game in GameMaker. First, obviously, we need to create a new project. I am creating mine on the desktop for ease of finding it later and nuking it. This is going to be Catch the Something. The general idea here is that we're going to have a room with a bouncy target, and we got to click on the target. Catch it, in other words. Now, on my copy, there might be some things that you don't see on yours. Again, I have the professional version, not the standard version, and I'm running off of Steam. So there might be a few tabs here and there that I have that you might not have. I won't be going into any of those. Everything that I am doing can be done, in fact, with the free version of GameMaker. But as I said in a previous video, don't try to use the free version for the course. It will not work. Okay, so we'll get this created up, and here is our default GameMaker screen. We've got a couple important areas. Our compile and message area is down here. Won't be of all that much use for this course, but especially once you get to the prototyping course, you'll definitely be paying a lot of attention to this area down here. This area here will have whichever window that you're currently working with at the time, sprites, objects, paths, what have you. Over here is your resource list. It shows you all of your sprites, your sounds, your rooms, your objects, everything that you currently have available for the game itself to use. We have ye old standard toolbar across the top here with your standard new game, open existing game, save the game buttons. The main buttons I tend to use on this is save button, run the game and debug, stop the game, and clean project asset compiler cache. Generally speaking, if you notice GameMaker starting to do something a little bit weird, click on that broom icon, because just sometimes the precompiled cache gets corrupted, or if you make a change and the change doesn't appear to be showing up, clean the cache. The rest of these buttons I generally don't use. And target should always be set to Windows. Not that you'll probably have much of a choice, depending on which version you have, but you want the target set to Windows, configuration, default. All right. So what are the different areas here? So we have sprites. Sprites are the image resources that you are going to be interacting with. If you want to interact or move an image, interact with or move an image, it's got to be a sprite. Sounds includes your sound effects, and it includes your background music. Backgrounds are for non-interactive static images. You can change backgrounds. That's digging into the GML scripting language. But generally speaking, backgrounds are static and non-interactive. You cannot interact with the background. It cannot be done. Don't try. If you want to interact with an image, background or otherwise, it must be a sprite. Paths are for controlling where a game object should move. So say maybe you've got a patrol route that you want an enemy to take through a game. That would be a path. Another good example would be a tower defense game. Maybe you want to specify which, this enemy goes down this branch of the area, this enemy goes down this branch, or, things like that. A tower defense game would be another example of something that you would use paths. Scripts we really won't be messing with in this class. If you move on to prototyping, you'll be messing with scripts a whole lot, but it's not something that you really mess with in this one. This is for when the drag and drop areas just simply don't provide you enough power and you need to start digging down a little bit deeper. Shaders, not touching with a 10-foot pole, moving on. Fonts are for if you want something besides the standard font style that comes with GameMaker. Not something we need to mess with, but if you want to, it's there. Timelines. Tower defense games are a perfect example of timelines. You know how you hit the start button and 5 seconds later an enemy spawns. And then 6 seconds, a second after that, another enemy spawns. A second after that, another enemy spawns. 5 seconds after that, more enemies spawn. That would be a timeline. That's the kind of thing that you would use a timeline to set up. Nothing that we'll be using in the formal assignments, but there will be a supplementary video covering that in case you want to use it for your project. Objects. This is the meat and potatoes of your game right here. If it's in the room, if it's moving, interacting, if it's doing something, it is an object. Period. You will end up with lots of these in your projects. A room is sort of a container for all of the objects. You could almost kind of think of a room as a window, almost. Your title screen is going to be a room. Your first level is going to be a room. Your game over is going to be a room. Your victory screen is going to be a room. That's what the rooms are for. They're containers for the objects that will actually be presented to the player. Include files, not touching with the 10-foot pole, moving on. Extensions, not touching with the 10-foot pole, moving on. Those are more advanced options, and there will be no need to mess with those at all whatsoever in the Game 105 course. Constants we will touch on very lightly. It will never be mandatory to use them, but these are ways like if you've got a movement speed and say a lot of different objects share this movement speed, well, instead of having each object have that movement speed literally typed in as like say 8, you would say default move speed as a constant equals 8. That way you have one number to change instead of say 15 numbers to change. Game information is not something that you will be using for most projects. However, for your final project, I expect to see instructions on how to play your game in this, because by default, if you hit F1, this will show up. And global game settings, not really something we need to mess with. About the only useful thing here is to go into project info, update the author and information, and if you're going to be releasing this, updating version and company product information, whatnot, splash screen, game icons, if you're going to actually be releasing the game. All right, so that's just the super fast overview. Let's just step through how to create a game. Again, I'm not going for comprehension on what exactly it is that we are doing, rather showing the workflow. So first, I'm going to need 2 sprites. I'm going to need a sprite for the wall. I'm going to need a sprite for my target. So I'm going to right-click on sprites, or I could click on this button, or I could go to resources and create sprite, or I could do Shift plus Control plus S. Honestly, I use right-click. So I'm going to create a sprite. I'm going to give it the name of SPR, capital W, wall. I will talk more about naming conventions later. You don't have to call it that. Just keep in mind you can't have 2 resources with the same name. So I can't have a wall sprite and a wall object. GameMaker will not allow me to do that. I'm going to go into Edit Sprite. I'm going to click on Create a New Sprite. And just to be ornery, I am going to set this to 48 by 48. You will see the reason for this in a moment. I am then going to double click on this to bring up the in-GameMaker sprite editor. It's okay if all you got to do is some minor touch-ups, or if you're just creating solid blocks of color like what we're doing, it's great. More detailed work, you kind of really honestly need an external editor. But for now, all I'm going to do is grab a random color. Oh, that color blue looks good. Grab the paint tool, fill it in, check mark, and check mark. Now to create my target, I'm going to create another sprite. This one I'm going to call SPR target. Go into Edit Sprite. Create a new sprite. This one I will leave at 32 by 32. Double click on the image. And I'm going to mouse wheel up. I'm going to use the mouse wheel up to zoom in on this. I'm going to grab the circle tool, which by default is going to use my left color as the outline, the right as a solid fill, and drag in a circle. Check mark, OK. Make sure you use those green check marks to close out windows, not the X. If you use the X, it won't save your stuff. Now I'm going to create some objects to hold these. So I'm going to create an object. First one I'm going to call wall. I'm going to set it to my sprite wall. And I'm going to mark it as solid. I'll see why in a moment. And honestly, walls don't do much, so that's all I need to do for it. So, OK. Then I'm going to create a new object. And again, that was right click. I'm going to call this target. I'm going to set the sprite by clicking in here and saying sprite target. And as soon as this target is created, I want it to move. So I'm going to add an event. I'm going to add, where'd you go? The create event right in front of my face. Sorry about that. I'm going to add in the create event. And then over here, these are my actions. These are the things that the game object can do or do to others. So I'm going to drag over this green multi-way arrow here. And you know you got the right one. It's if you see this little arrow pad here. And we're going to highlight all of the arrows except the middle one. Do not highlight the middle one. Do not highlight that square. That means don't move. And we're going to set the speed to 8. That might seem low. Don't set it higher. And what this means is that it's going to randomly choose to move in one of these directions. Click OK. Now, of course, we need a room to contain our objects. So I'm going to create, oops, mouse slipped. I'm going to create a room. Maximize that out there for a moment. Now, initially, if I click here, I will have the option to change my object. So I want to be on my wall. Now, if I try and place my wall, you notice I can't actually place them good without overlapping. That is because of my snap. Currently, my snap is set to 32 by 32. These are 48 by 48 images. Notice that this isn't going to fit perfectly. I'm going to have this side be a little bit thicker than the other sides. I'll just have to deal with it. Now, I left-click to place items down. Now, I don't really want to left-click down this all the way around this edge. So if I look over here, I will notice Shift plus Control add multiple. So Control Shift, drag. So I'll just make that wall thicker than everybody else by putting down 2. And I'm done. Should I, oops, Control Z. Should I happen to add in extras, that's what I was trying to do, I can just hold down Control and right mouse button and drag to erase the extras. Okay, now I have my walls in. I can go ahead and switch to my target. I'll put a couple targets in. Snap doesn't really matter for those. And click on the green check mark to close out my room. Now we can hit the run button. Down here it'll show us compile information, and off they go, straight out of the room. Yeah. Number one thing to keep in mind when working with computers. Computers are phenomenally, incredibly stupid. They will do exactly what you tell them to do, nothing less, nothing more. We did not tell those targets to stop or bounce or do anything else. We just told them to move, and so they moved. So let's fix that. So I'm going to go back into my target. I'm going to add in a new event. I'm going to add in a collision event with a wall. And when they collide with the wall, I want them to bounce, which is over here in the jump section of move. And against solid objects, this is why we had to mark the wall as solid. So I'm just going to accept all the defaults on that. Now I don't have to hit OK. This change has already been saved to the object. So if I hit the play button, and now they're bouncing. Of course, I also wanted to be able to click on them to get some points. So I'm going to add in another event, this time a mouse event. And I want a left pressed event. A left button event would be continuous. Every single step, that event would be firing off if the left mouse button was down. So that means I could just press and hold the left mouse button and chase down the targets. That's not what I want. I want the user to press on each target to get the point. I want them to kill their mouse. So I'm going to go with left pressed. I'm going to go down to score and say, okay, well, if you successfully clicked on something, I'm going to set the score to 1 relative. Again, to be explained in future videos. So 1 relative, okay. I also want these to move to a new location. So I'm going to come over here to my Move tab, and I'm going to tell it to jump to random. Now, the nice thing about jump to random is that it won't jump it to a solid object. It'll jump it to a clear position within the room. So it's a nice little shortcut of just saying, okay, jump to some empty position in the room. Finally, I want them to choose a new direction. So I will go in here and say move fixed. Select all the arrows and set my speed to 8. Now we can test it again. And as I click on them, notice they're now changing directions. This one's diagonal, diagonal. Apparently they really like diagonals. There we go. Finally decided to go up and down. So you can see that it's working. However, a couple of things. It's kind of really hard to actually click on them, and we don't have a score. This sort of highlights another critical aspect of game development: iteration. Iteration is key. Play your game over and over and over and over again, because that is how you find out the flaws. That is how you find the fun in the game, is playing it over and over again to try to figure out what it is that you need to be doing. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to slow these guys down to 6 and make them still reasonably challenging to hit, but less frustrating. I am also going to add in something to draw my score. So under Objects, I'm going to create a new object. I'm going to call this Score Draw. I'm going to add in an event, a draw event, a draw GUI event. It would also work with a regular draw event in this case. Come back over to Score, and notice we have a convenient draw score action. Put that at 5, 5, which is in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. Go into my room and add it in. Now, since I didn't assign it a sprite, it just has this little question mark, which will not be there when I hit the play button. Rather, there's going to be nothing there, and that's exactly what I wanted. So now I can see my score. Things are moving a little bit slower now, and it's easier for me to click on them. And we can see our score is going up. Let's add in a new target, because I also want to show something here. Let's create a sprite. I'm going to call this SPR target 2. I'm going to edit the sprite, create a new sprite, leave it at 32 by 32. Go in, zoom in. Now this time, see here, let's choose red, just because. And I'm just going to draw in this really kind of thin, no, maybe not too thin, this thick sort of diagonal line. And I'm also going to click on precision collision detection, because I want this to be precise. I want you to have to click on that red strip. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate target. So I'm going to right-click on target and tell it to duplicate. I'm going to call this target 2. And I'm going to make this move stupidly slow because I need to be able to show some things. So on the create event, it'll start moving super slow, and if we actually catch it, it'll move super slow, speed of 1. Go into my room, set my object to there. Oops, and I forgot to change my sprite. I'm trying to go too fast. Come back over here, change that to sprite 2. And notice that does update the one that was already placed in my room. Add a couple of these guys in. Hit the play button. And I've got this really cool shape. I think it's going to be really awesome to catch. But you notice I'm within the image square, but since I turned it on to precise collision detection, it ignores any clicks that are outside of the target area. So I can do this while it's moving really slow, but if I change that up to the same speed, come on, if I change that up to the same speed that everything else is on, now this becomes a lot more challenging to click on this. And again, that's part of the iterative process. I thought I had a great idea for a new shape. I put it into the game and realized, oh no, the way I'm doing collision detection actually makes that fairly frustrating to try and click on. I'd either have to, at this point, change the shape or try to think of, okay, well, maybe this should be a bonus shape. You get extra bonus points if you can catch this before it disappears. So again, like I said, everything that was done in this video is going to be gone over in more detail in future videos. The whole point of this was just sort of to get some familiarization with GameMaker and to see the overall workflow for creating a game. And so with that, until the next video.